The official result says 20th place. DNF, engine failure. Disaster. Except that's not what happened. Not even close. Garrett Mitchell, better known as Cleetus McFarland, went from 25th to 7th at Kansas Speedway in one of the most overlooked ARCA drives of the 2026 season, and then watched it all disappear in a cloud of white smoke with 25 laps to go. If you only read the box score, you completely missed the story. So here's the full version from the beginning. To understand why Kansas mattered so much, you have to understand what happened in the days leading up to it. NASCAR had just denied Cleetus O'Reilly Auto Parts Series Super Speedway approval, meaning no Talladega, no Daytona in that series, at least not yet. The denial came directly off his NOAPS debut at Rockingham Speedway on April 4, where he finished 32nd, 6 laps down, spun twice, and nearly went around on 2 other occasions. NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell addressed the decision publicly. It's kind of every race. So, we go to the next race. We'll see. Obviously, there's some progression we need to see. I applaud our team. It's a tough call. He's a hugely popular driver, but these are the best drivers in the world, and we gotta make sure that we got the right guys out there. That statement set the terms. Progression, race by race. Prove it. Kansas was his first real chance to answer. This was his 6th career ARCA Menard Series national start, and he wasn't showing up cold. He had just come off a top 5 finish in the ARCA East Series at Rockingham, and an 11th place result at Daytona earlier in 2026. The resume was short, but the momentum was real. He wasn't just racing for a result at Kansas. He was racing for credibility in front of the exact people who had just told him he needed to do more. Kansas had its own layer of chaos before the race even started. Cleetus rolled in with a brand new paint scheme on the number 30 Rhett Jones Racing Ford Mustang, prominently featuring baldeagle.com, his own merchandise and content platform. That's right, he was essentially sponsoring himself. And before the green flag dropped, he leaned directly into that dynamic with one of the better pre-race lines of the weekend. He said, "I'm going to be fired if I don't get a top 10. That was the entire punchline. His sponsor was himself, so the only person making the call to fire him was also the person driving the car. It was funny, it was self-aware, and as the afternoon played out, it became a whole lot more meaningful. Because for a long stretch of that race, a top 10 wasn't just possible. It was right there. In ARCA's official pre-race practice session, McFarland qualified 13th fastest in the number 30 baldeagle.com Ford. That wasn't front row speed, but it was a legitimate indicator that he wasn't showing up lost on a 1.5-mile intermediate track. He had pace. He had a setup that worked. And then, qualifying got washed out entirely. Inclement weather canceled qualifying. And ARCA's official starting lineup was set by the rulebook, which dropped McFarland all the way back to 25th on the grid. Just like that, any chance of a clean, quiet afternoon disappeared. If he wanted anything from Kansas, he was going to have to earn it the hard way, by passing cars, managing traffic, and doing it at a track where dirty air, restarts, and lane selection punish even experienced drivers. This is where the race became genuinely impressive. After starting 25th when inclement weather rained out qualifying, he quickly marched through the field at Kansas Speedway. He moved up 11 positions in the first 5 laps, and was running 11th by the halfway break. Let that number settle. 11 positions in 5 laps. Starting 25th by lap 5, he had already carved through nearly half the field. This wasn't surviving early chaos. This wasn't inheriting positions because someone else spun out. He was actively making progress, reading lanes, executing passes, and racing with a level of composure that hadn't always been visible in his earlier runs. By the halfway break, he was sitting 11th. The top 10 was no longer a stretch goal. It was right there in front of him, and the contrast with Rockingham was impossible to ignore. At Rockingham, the conversation around Cleetus had been about spins, erratic moments, and whether NASCAR had seen enough to trust him with bigger events. At Kansas, for a long stretch, the conversation was the exact opposite. He continued to make progress, reaching as high as 7th after a 3-wide pass on a mid-race restart. Read that again. 7th from 25th on the grid. A YouTuber against actual racing drivers on a national ARCA stage. He was not hanging on to the tail end of the lead lap. He was taking positions. He was finding pace on a 1.5-mile intermediate track, the exact discipline where his experience was thinnest, and he was making it look manageable. At that point, the race had turned into exactly the kind of afternoon his supporters had been waiting for. Every critic of his NASCAR presence defaults to the same question. Sure, he brings viewers, but can he actually race at this level? Kansas, through the first 2/3 of the event, was beginning to answer that with something more meaningful than any media segment could provide. Then came the part of the race that hurt. He soon began to fade, and that's because the engine was going sour. Running around 10th, the slight drop-off in lap times wasn't a setup issue or a tire issue. It was the beginning of a mechanical problem working its way toward a full failure. He had been running 10th and had previously been as high as 7th when smoke began appearing inside the car. The team and driver both knew something was wrong. The question was whether the engine would hold together long enough to get to the checkered flag. It would not. With about 25 laps to go, the engine let go in a plume of white smoke and dumped oil all over the front stretch. This was not a small mechanical retirement that only the timing tower noticed. Andy Jankowiak and Isabella Robusto were running right behind him and crashed in the oil, spinning and slamming the wall. 2 cars, 2 impacts with the wall. All of it triggered directly by the oil Cleetus' engine had just deposited across the racing surface. ARCA officials displayed a red flag and halted the race to clean up oil from the incident. The timing made it feel particularly brutal. He had done all the hard work already. He had passed cars, managed restarts, executed a 3-wide move, and built himself a legitimate race position. The engine chose to expire with 24 laps remaining. After all of that had already happened, with the finish line still close enough to touch. Here's the moment that most people who only caught the highlights missed entirely. Despite the engine failure, Cleetus managed to keep the car in one piece as he slid sideways in his own oil through turns 1 and 2 without ever losing control. In the middle of a full engine failure, with oil on the track, smoke in the cockpit, and 2 cars crashing behind him, he kept the number 30 off the wall. In the racing community, the reaction was immediate. Reddit users pointed out that 90% plus of drivers put it into the wall there, and they weren't wrong. If that car snaps hard right and hits the wall at that moment, the story of Kansas becomes significantly worse. Not just mechanically, but narratively. Instead, he threaded it through. The motor was done. The race was done. But he avoided turning a mechanical failure into a physical wreck. And in the context of a driver still trying to demonstrate racecraft to a skeptical NASCAR approval committee, that matters more than it might look on the surface. Standing outside the care center alongside NASCAR Cup Series driver Carson Hocevar, Cleetus delivered one of the more honest post-race reads you'll hear from anyone in a garage. Did you see that drift through the entire turn 1 and 2? That was awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing that highlight reel of the baldeagle.com. Number 30. Overall, I had a blast. I made it 75 laps though, so that's pretty good. If we had blown the motor at 51, probably would have shed a tear. But I made it through 75% of the race, so I'll call it a win. He also circled back to the sponsor joke that had started the weekend, noting that he hoped baldeagle.com would not drop him, which again lands precisely because baldeagle.com is his own platform, and the only person making that call is himself. His attitude here matters beyond the entertainment value. After NASCAR denied him O'Reilly Series Superspeedway approval, this weekend could have easily turned into another I told you so moment if he had circulated at the back all afternoon and never showed anything. Instead, he gave the sport a race where the result says 28th and the run says something considerably more interesting. NASCAR EVP and Chief Racing Development Officer John Probst had addressed the broader situation before Kansas, and his comments reflect exactly where the sanctioning body actually stands. He's done a great job to this point. He understands the decisions that we have to make. There is a fine line to tread sometimes between the entertainment and the sport of racing. And I think that we're all the folks in R&D. We watch Cleetus's videos. We like Cleetus. It's not like it's us sitting there saying, oh, we're out to get Cleetus. We're not. We love Cleetus. We love what he's done to our sport, or for our sport, and will continue to do. NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell had been clear after the Rockingham decision that approval is evaluated on a race-by-race basis, and that progression is what the sanctioning body is looking for. Kansas, before the mechanical failure, looked like exactly that progression. The position trail alone makes the argument. Started 25th, moved to 11th by halfway, reached 7th on pace, and was still inside the top 10 when the engine expired. A clean but anonymous 15th place finish is actually a weaker development argument than what Kansas produced. Because Kansas showed pace, movement, composure, and the ability to execute passes in traffic at an intermediate track. The engine failure took the result away. It did not erase the run. And here's what happened next. Both Cleetus and George Siciliano, better known as Squirrel McNutt, returned for the ARCA Menards Series race at Talladega Superspeedway. Squirrel, for his part, had an impressive Kansas debut of his own, finishing 12th, one lap down in his first main ARCA division start. At Talladega, Cleetus finished 20th, his best career result, in a race that drew over 100,000 concurrent viewers on his in-car camera feed alone. His second NOAPS start is confirmed at Nashville on May 30, back in the RCR, number 33 Chevrolet, backed by Tommy's Express Car Wash. The progression NASCAR asked for at Rockingham? It's happening. Kansas was the proof. Talladega was the statement. If you think Kansas was a disaster, drop that in the comments. If you think Cleetus is right that running top 10 before the blow-up counts as a win, say that too. Either way, make sure you're subscribed, because the Nashville race is next, and that story is going to be just as wild.